Hello, hello. Welcome. Today is Friday, December 18th, and we are going to be talking all about the stimulus package that is currently being debated in Congress. So I've been gone for a couple of weeks. So there hasn't been a whole heck of a lot to update on, but there actually is today. So I wanted to make sure I jumped back on here this Friday to give you this update. So right now I am live on my YouTube channel. I am also live on my Facebook group. If you're not a member, come join us. It's called Financial Literacy for Women Business Owners. So come on over. So we're going to be talking about the stimulus, specifically as it relates to small business owners, entrepreneurs, self-employed people, and what is currently in the bill that is being debated. So I'll give you guys. So tell me when you're here. Say hi so that I know that you can hear me. It always is helpful to know that I'm not talking to myself. But right now, I mean, it's like breaking news what's going on right now. They're very close, it appears, to an actual deal. So I'm very tentative to say that because those of you guys who have been watching this for a while know that we thought that back in early August as well. And so it doesn't take a lot for things to fall apart, but I do think that there has been a lot of pressure put on these lawmakers to pass something. So what has happened at this point is they've decided to tie this bill with the government funding bill. So what that means is every so often they have to pass the government funding bill. This government funding bill would be to fund the government through next September. That's just part of normal practice. So we thought they might do that a couple of months ago. They opted not to, but they have decided, nope, we need to pass something. So they are going to actually be tying the two together. Well, today is the date, actually. Today is the deadline for the government funding bill. So unless they pass that, which is unlikely that all of that they could draft a bill, pass it in that amount of time, or they will pass a resolution to basically give themselves a little bit more time, which is probably the more likely case. If they don't do either of those things, the government will shut down at midnight tonight. Now, from everything that I'm seeing from Congress, that's not the intent. It doesn't look like that is really a likely place that they will be heading. I would bet on the fact that they will probably just extend a little while longer. So maybe they can work through the weekend and into next week. But I think they know they really want to pass something before the end of the year. Why is it so important before the end of the year? Well, we all know why it's important in general, right? Money is needed. Small businesses are suffering. People are suffering. It is still a really tenuous time right now. And so aid is needed, and they know aid is needed. But also the fact that a lot of these programs that the CARES Act put into place expire at the end of the year. So there's a lot tied up in that, including things like pandemic unemployment assistance, which expires at the end of the year. There are the EIDL loan program. So for those of you guys who, if you've not gotten an EIDL loan, this is a loan, right? But it's to be able to help you in your business. If you've not applied for an EIDL loan, remember the advances don't exist, but you might want to think about doing that. Now, you could roll the dice. They should hopefully be extending that program longer and maybe even bringing the advances back. We'll have to see. But if you need money and if that is not available, then it might be an option. However, in this new bill, we are expecting to see PPP opening back up. So this would be a second round of PPP, likely also for most of the different drafts that I've seen. It likely would also apply to businesses that didn't get a PPP the first time. So if you didn't realize it applied to you, or you didn't get one or something the very first time around, you may be able to get this second round of PPP. Additionally, though, there likely will be some added qualifications for this, meaning last time with PPP, you didn't have to prove hardship. You didn't have to prove that you had been impacted, right? You had to certify that this was necessary, but you didn't really have to prove a whole heck of a lot. You didn't have to turn in your reports. Now, this time, you actually will have to prove, and likely they've kind of changed around the thresholds. It's moved quite a bit. But the most recent drafts that I've seen had about a 30% drop quarter over quarter, meaning if in one quarter of 2020, so let's say Q3 of 2020 this year versus Q3 of 2020 last year, if you were down by, say, 30% in your revenue, then you would qualify for another one. You'd have to be down at least 30% to qualify in the most recent versions. That has been as high as 40 to 50%. So we have to see what actually comes out in the final version, but likely there will be more parameters around that second PPP. Whether those parameters will apply to people who are getting their first PPP is unclear, but they definitely would apply to people getting a second PPP loan. Those PPP loans are also likely to be a lot more flexible as to what you can use them for. So remember, we had all the changing rules around the, it was 75-25, and then it was 60-40 for payroll versus non-payroll, and there were only certain things that you could spend it on. Likely those rules would be relaxed a little bit. There would still be rules for what you could spend it on, but it wouldn't be as specific to that. And there likely wouldn't be the same bright lines for percentages. So likely it would cover even things like protective equipment, if you had to retrofit your where you worked to be able to because of COVID for some reason, that you'd be able to spend it on that. And yes, that would be versus 2019. So you would look at Q3 2020, let's say, versus Q3 2019. It could, the most recent versions I saw said any quarter. So if it was Q2 or Q4, you could pick one of those. So the advice that I have for people there is, if you want to be able to get that second round of PPP loans, and I do think they could, we don't know how quickly they would go. I mean, it's another 300 billion-ish is largely what they're talking about, which is a good chunk. So it's not something that's going to be gone overnight. But I think given the fact that people know that these are going to get forgiven, there was a lot more uncertainty last time that probably prevented people from getting their PPP loans. Now I think that people will be more apt to get them. So I would start getting your documentation together. So you're going to need to get your 2020 documentation and numbers together anyway for taxes before too long. You might as well start getting that, because you're probably going to need to show your P&L from, let's say, an accounting software or even a spreadsheet to prove out the fact that you had this decline, right? So you want to make sure that you have those records that you are doing. Is it unlikely that forgiveness would be possible on new PPP? No, it would be similar rules, and they would be forgivable if used correctly. So it would not be, now EIDL, again, probably will not be forgiven, but a second round of PPP would also be potentially forgivable if used properly. Let's see. If you received an EIDL loan at midsummer and now need more, do you request more or a separate EIDL loan? I believe the process they've said for that is to request an increase versus applying a second time. So there should be in some of the paperwork that you got probably some instructions on how to request an increase, or you could call the SBA and find out. But if you need more EIDL, that is what I would do. So would we qualify if we got PPP the first round? Possibly. Sorry, I need to be putting these up here. I'm just reading them. Possibly. It depends. If you were significantly negatively affected, you could. So again, if it was maybe that 30% drop, that's the most recent I've seen, 30% drop in revenue versus last year, then yes, you probably would qualify for a second. Let's see. I haven't seen what this is going to mean for new businesses starting in 2020. The big problem with that is there's no real records for them to go off of, right? So if you have really, really good dialed in records for your P&L, then possibly, but I wouldn't necessarily expect to see a lot of assistance for brand new businesses. Let's see. Yes. So if you were denied the first time, you can. The question, I think, would be why? Why were you denied for that PPP loan? If you were denied because in 2019 you didn't have a profit, right? Then likely that would still apply this year. It will be interesting to see how it shakes out, how they're going to have you actually show all of this, and how they're going to calculate out what the loan amount would be, if that's still going to be based off of 2019 or if they're going to use a different methodology. We don't know until they roll all of that out, and then Treasury comes back with the guidelines on how to actually do that. An S Corp can qualify if you have employees, absolutely, because it's probably, again, it's more than likely going to be based on a payroll calculation again, but we don't know for sure. They may use a different strategy, but last time they priced it on payroll. So if you have payroll as an S Corp, whether that's your own payroll or your payroll of your employees, that would count. But you do have to have W-2 wages as an employee of your own business in order to be able to pay yourself with it. So a lot of people who weren't paying themselves as an employee of their business and they had an S Corp, that would not count. You can't count draws, only your actual W-2 wages. Same rules as last time. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is a really good question. So here's what I'm going to say about filing for forgiveness on the first round. Um, I don't know that whether you're going to apply for the second matters as much about applying for forgiveness. I think some banks have told people things like that before, that if they think they are going to get a second, they shouldn't apply for forgiveness on the first. I'm not going to say that. What I will say is this: there is still some information in the bill that it will likely make it easier for people to get forgiveness with their PPP loans once the new stimulus passes. What does that mean? We'll have to see, but likely less paperwork might be involved for loans specifically under 150,000. So that might be reason enough to wait. Also, one of the things that we're still waiting to see is if they change the rule around having to deduct the EIDL advance from your PPP forgiveness amount. If they remove that rule, then it could be worth waiting, because we don't know if it would be retroactive or not if you already had your PPP loan forgiven. The last reason I want to mention, and this is something that I saw in some of the bills, not the bill that's currently being talked about, because I haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen what that will look like. But in one of the previous versions, there was some talk around the fact that some of the positive tax changes that they may make, which I'll talk about here in a minute, might only apply prospectively to people who get forgiven after the bill passes. So if you're sitting here today and you have not taken any action on forgiveness, hold out just a little bit, because I do think it could be worth it to figure out what's going on with this bill before you make a decision. So that's another thing that's in this bill. We've talked about this a little bit, the tax deductibility piece. So as a rewind, PPP itself, the money you're getting, is not income. That's what was written into the CARES Act. Congress said it's not income. However, the things that you pay with it, okay, are not deductible expenses. So if you own a company and you are using it to pay your employees payroll and rent, right, you will not be able to deduct that amount of your PPP loan on your taxes. And they recently came out probably about a month ago, the IRS came out and said, even if you're not forgiven by the time you do your tax return next year, if you reasonably expect that you will be forgiven, if you don't really have reason to believe you wouldn't be forgiven, you can't deduct those expenses. Now, that is a ruling that wasn't in the CARES Act. That came from the IRS later, that said, yeah, it's not income, fine, but we're not going to let you deduct the expenses, which kind of roundabout puts it as being ultimately equivalent in a lot of ways to if it had been income to begin with. So that is one of those things that is in a lot of the versions of the bill that I've seen, is to say, no, IRS, that's not what we meant. When we said not taxable, we meant not taxable. Don't try to come up with some back end way to make this thing taxable. So that is likely to be something that changes. So if you have a PPP loan sitting there today and you want to be able to deduct those expenses, which you probably do, right? Then it could be worth waiting and seeing how it plays out, because again, they can write this in two ways. They can write it however they want. If they make that change, they can write it and they can say that it's for everybody who got PPP loans, whether first round, second round, et cetera, that they can all deduct these expenses now. They can write it and say, only the second round of PPP loans. If you got a first round, then those expenses aren't deductible. They can also write it, and this would be maddening, I know, to many of you and to me, but they could write this thing and actually say, if you get forgiven after the loan passes, you can deduct those expenses, which would really suck, right? For those people who were like on it and went and got their forgiveness and now would be in a worse place. Now, I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I just know that until we see the text of how this final bill will be written, we don't know. And so it's worth it. It's not going to get worse. No, the rules are never going to get worse, right? I don't see any reason that they would make things harder. So the only benefit to applying for forgiveness now is to get it over and done with and lift that mental weight, which is a real thing, right? But there could be actual benefits to waiting if you haven't done it yet. So that's just something to think about if you are in that spot. Okay, let's see. So more than likely, yes, I haven't seen how it's written. So more than likely it will still be if it's still based off of payroll, if that's still how they calculate out the amount of the loan, which we don't know yet how they're going to calculate out the amount of the loan. There have been multiple different versions of bills. So when we see that, the presumption is they'll probably use the same methodology, but maybe not. They could come up with a completely different methodology to figure out these PPP rules. But remember, they're the Paycheck Protection Program. That's what it's called. So it makes sense that they would base that off of payroll, in which case it would still be based off of W-2 earnings if you're an S Corp or a C Corp. Good. I'm glad you found that helpful. Let's see. So Karen says, how would that work if you haven't run payroll and have been on unemployment? We stopped running payroll July 1st when our PPP. So you did run payroll. You did pay payroll with your PPP, right? Do you mean how would that work as far as the new version? I would guess that if they continued to base it on payroll, it would still be based off of 2019 payroll. But I don't know that for sure. It seems weird to base it off of 2020 because 2020 for most people is the reason that they need aid, because they weren't keeping up with what they previously had. So I think it would likely still be based on 2019, but we'll have to see. Yes, they still qualify. Independent contractors and self-employed people would still be part of PPP. It would be based likely, assuming they use the same methodology of payroll, it would be based off of your Schedule C, line 31, like before. As of right now, that should not impact it. That would seem kind of silly if it did. So I don't see any correlation, but we will watch for that in however they word the final bill. So a lot of people are asking the same question about, well, if we have one, is this going to help us or hurt us if we haven't applied for forgiveness? I can't imagine that it would hurt. I don't think it would have an impact. If it was written that way, it seems like it would be very unfair, but it's not impossible. So again, we're just going to have to wait and see when we see the wording on the bill. Okay, let's see. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about unemployment as well. So my guess would be still 2019. Again, we haven't seen the final bill, so this is all, conjecture at this point, because there have been so many different versions of different bills, you guys, and they're still working it out. They're still coming to that agreement. So we have to wait and then see the final agreement that they come up with and how it is worded. But I would assume, my guess is they don't want to rock the boat. They have processes and procedures. If they change what this whole thing is based off of, it's going to add a heck of a lot of complexity. And I think at this point, that seems like now it's the government, so maybe they will, but we'll have to see. Let's see. If you read the language in the bill, the effective date refers to the date the original bill passed, not the current changes. So hopefully that stays. Yeah, it depends. It depends on, so again, there's been a few different versions of bills here. So we have to kind of hold out and see what ends up in the final version. Let's see. Lots of people asking if you will have had to apply for forgiveness. I really would be surprised. That seems, and that seems like it would also create a rush for the banks as far as people applying for forgiveness. You have 10 months from the end of your covered period to apply for forgiveness. So it seems that it would not make sense for you to have had to get forgiveness on the first one to get a second one. Okay. So I want to talk about a couple of other changes quickly here to make sure that we get this in. A couple of the other things that are in this bill. So we talked about PPP. PPP is going to reopen more than likely. Again, this is not even an agreement yet, you guys. It has to be agreed, hopefully today or sometime over this weekend, but it is closer than it has been in the past. Then it would have to pass both the House and Senate, and then it would have to get signed in by the president. But it is looking more likely than it has in the future. Unemployment. So for anyone that this applies to, unemployment would be extended. We would get an extra $300 of unemployment. I think through April was the most recent that I saw. So they'd be adding $300 a week from January through April. It likely would also extend pandemic unemployment assistance and allow you extra weeks to claim. So if you are on PUA, then you would be able to likely continue on it. So that is one of the big things. And let's see. So those are kind of the major things. Now, another major thing, and this seemed like as of last week, it seemed off the table. And then I think with just public pressure, it's now been put back on the table, which is direct stimulus payments. So you guys remember our $1,200 that we got Last time around, right? This would be another round of direct payments. Right now, it looks like they're agreeing on $600. Now, who gets it? That's still a little bit up for debate, whether dependents get it, and if so, which dependents are age limits. That we're going to have to wait and see as well. But it does look now more likely, where we thought last week they were trying to decide, and they basically said it looked like it was going to be either unemployment benefit, extra unemployment benefits, or a stimulus check. Now it looks like they're putting both in, which was a little bit surprising, but I think that probably came from pressure. So $600, I mean, may not be a huge amount to have a huge impact, but it's something. And so it looks like that's probably where they're going to end up on direct payments. But again, nothing has been agreed. So we will have to see. Yes, it looks like they've been talking about that as well. If they'll expect, well, actually, I'm not sure if I've seen the SBA loan payment ones, but I have seen on student loans, the moratorium on student loans is likely to also be extended. I'm not sure about the SBA loan payments. I haven't seen anything particularly on that. So I haven't seen it highlighted in any of the summaries that I've seen. So I wouldn't necessarily count on that, but again, you never know. Let's see. So this is the problem, right? This is what I've been saying about this is we don't know. And it's likely like that. I don't know that they're necessarily having an eye to fairness in all of this. I think a lot of times it's an eye to budget, right? And so if you've already gone through the process of getting your EID or your PPP loan forgiven, and they subtracted your EIDL advance, and they do change that, which again, we don't know if they will, but if they do, would it be retroactive? It depends on how they write the bill. We don't know. We don't know. So again, if that's something you want to make sure and see how that plays out, then you can wait it out and see. Okay. So this is what I was saying earlier. In most cases at this point, it probably makes sense to wait and see what happens with this stimulus bill, because there are a few things that if they change, it may be retroactive. It may not be. We have to really see exactly what comes through in that final bill. So to me, I'd rather at this point, if you've already done it, you're done, and hopefully you're comfortable in that, like, it's done. But at this point, I would just hold out and just wait and see what's going to happen to make sure that you don't kick yourself for doing it too early. Okay, let's see. So your PPP loan number should be on your PPP loan paperwork. I would imagine that you should have your contract that should include your loan number on it, I would imagine. Let's see. Okay, ask me your questions, guys. So those are really the main things. So I would just start getting records together if you think that you may want to take advantage of that second round of PPP if and when it opens. Start getting organized with your financials so that you can prove out, look, this is what I made during Q3 of this year. This is what I made last year. Get your payroll reports together, get everything together such that when and if they reopen that portal, you'll be ready to go. And hopefully it'll be a much smoother process. I would imagine it'll be faster this time around. The deadline for PPP forgiveness, well, the deadline to apply before you start having to pay, right? So you have 10 months from the end of your covered period to apply for forgiveness, okay? Before those loan payments start coming due. So that's important to note, is that after that point, those loan payments are going to start coming due. So effectively, you have about 10 months. You have a while to apply. So in most cases, for most of you, it's not going to make a huge difference to wait a couple of weeks and see how all of this shakes out. The latest version is still the version. So I think it was late June. The rules on forgiveness have not changed, other than the fact that they've come out with one extra forgiveness application. So right now in the PPP tracker, you'll see the EZ in the full form. Now they made an even easier one than the EZ, which is the most confusing thing in the entire world. The 3508S is the newest one. That's for loans under 50,000. So if your loan is 50,000 or under, you do the 3508S. I have a YouTube video out on my YouTube channel about each of the different applications, but I have one about that one. And then if your loan is above 50,000, you either would use the easy or the full form, depending on your specific situation. So the goal is to always get the easy because it's easier, right? But really, a lot of people have been confused because they are self-employed and they think they need to use the easy form because that sounds right? And they're confused when their bank has been telling them, no, you have to use the 3508S. The 3508S is easier. There are less qualifications and things that you have to meet to get forgiveness. So it's actually a good thing. But I think it's been really confusing the way they almost needed to call it the even easier form. I feel like that would have made it a lot more, a lot easier to figure out. But let's see. Let's see. So, I don't know on this one if there's a new PPP loan. Would we be able to convert or pay down the SBA large loan and convert it to another PPP loan? Currently, we already have. I don't know if you're meaning the EIDL to pay down. You would not be able to use PPP likely to pay down EIDL. That's not one of the approved usages of it. You would have to use it for other things. Now, here's on the plus side, right? If you use your PPP loan for the things that you're supposed to, payroll, rent, blah, 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 right? And you get it forgiven, that will give you more money to then use that you can pay down your EIDL with. Does that make sense? So it's like this whole money is fungible thing, but you can't directly say, well, I'm using my PPP funds to pay down an EIDL, but you can use your PPP funds for things that maybe you would have used other money, and that should free up other money that you can hopefully use to then pay down your EIDL, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a roundabout way of doing it, but you can't directly do it. Okay. To be determined what they do with people who started their business in 2020. Yes, it's very short. So there's a short page and then it is a certification. So you just have to put a couple of numbers into it. Your FTE count doesn't count. It doesn't matter. So if you had 3 employees before and you have 1 now, it doesn't matter. It won't hurt you if you're using the 3508S, meaning you got 50,000 or under loan. So it's very quick and easy form to fill out. So that is the 3508S came out from Treasury after the others. And I think that was because there was not movement on the part of Congress to do another stimulus. And they were counting on that other stimulus to make the rules around PPP easier. Remember the whole talk of blanket forgiveness, right? And so because that wasn't getting passed and people were starting to apply for forgiveness and the banks didn't want to have to waste all this time on these small loans, Treasury took it upon themselves to say, well, we're going to actually have an even easier, a super quick application that takes away some of these kind of requirements around FTE and salary reductions and things like that for these really small loans of 50,000 and under. So they decided that kind of unilaterally, okay, in absence of Congress, we're going to make it a little bit easier. It's not as easy as it probably would be if we had some, if they laxed it from this congressional stimulus, right? Like that would probably be even easier because even with the 3508S, you still have to give supporting documentation and things like that. That's one of the things that might go away if Congress were to pass some kind of blanket forgiveness for loans 150,000 and under. But it is very short. It is very, very short. It should not take long. Okay. Let's see. Yes. I've heard that if you have enough payroll and rent on your PPP forgiveness application, you can skip the utilities. Do you know if that's true? Yes. Yeah. So here's what I would do. Don't claim more on that than you need to get full forgiveness, right? Because it can get really confusing when it talks about not then deducting those expenses on your tax return. If they don't change that, if the IRS keeps that rule, about not deducting those expenses, it can get really confusing when you had a PPP loan of 50,000, but your application has $80,000 worth of expenses on it, right? So just make sure you put enough on there that is full forgiveness because that's what you paid it for. You didn't pay $80,000 worth of expenses with your $50,000 PPP loan. So that's one of those areas. In a lot of ways, I think sometimes the easiest thing to do, because then you don't have to have as much documentation, is to just use it for payroll. If you used it in that 24 week period for payroll, if you had a payroll of that amount or more of your PPP loan, just say it was all payroll. That's going to be the easiest thing to do. You don't have to pull lease agreements for your rent and all of that kind of stuff. If you don't have enough payroll, that's when you have to look at what your other rent, utilities, things like that are. If you're self-employed, if you got the right amount of a PPP loan, you should be able to pay yourself the entire thing as payroll. So if you got 2.5 times your Schedule C, line 31, 2.5 months worth of that, you should be able to pay it all to yourself and get forgiveness, and use the 3508S if that's you. Okay. Woo. Woo, you guys. All right. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I feel like I live and breathe this stuff sometimes. I've taken a little bit of a pause and gone and done some of my more bread and butter, which is really being a profit strategist, financial literacy coach. This year just kind of happened to pivot into PPP world because that's what you guys needed. But there are a lot of components and moving parts. And so I'm glad I'm like, you're giving my information to them. I've actually had a lot of accountants tell me that they come to me to get the information to tell their clients, which I'm totally fine with. I think that's great. But yeah, feel free to send them, invite them to the group. Feel free to send people over here if they need updates on any of this stuff. I have a lot of empathy for accountants because they are in the middle of this serving clients one-to-one. That's not something that I do, right? My business, I do financial programs, group programs, and online courses. So that frees up some of my time that I'm not working one-to-one so that I can serve you guys. And so that's what I've really loved this year about having this type of business model is that it's allowed me to show up and really serve you and have that extra time to do that. So I actually like helping other accountants as well, kind of work through a lot of this. Okay. Let's see. I'll be applying for PPP for the first time. Sole proprietor. Yep. Should I use my bank? Because I've seen people go through PayPal. So I typically advise starting with your specific bank. That's typically what I tell people to do. That said, some of the big banks were not as great on PPP. Now, I think a lot of the kinks have been worked out at this point. But some of the big banks really did not serve in the way that they needed to. They really didn't show up. So I have always been a big fan of either using something like a fintech, which makes it easier, like PayPal, or using a small local community bank as well. Wells Fargo, I personally have a vendetta against Wells Fargo. So because you said Wells Fargo, I want to tell you to run far away. But that is a personal story for another day on them. But yes, you can try to approach them if you're comfortable working with your current bank. That's often the path will be the quickest probably with your own current bank, but you can also look at others as well. And we don't know who's going to open up the second round too. So it probably will be a lot of the same banks, I would imagine, that would open up the second round, but we'll have to wait and see. Thank you, Krista. I appreciate it. All right. Let's see. Please explain to me again about the FTE count, because SBA says to count employees paid through temporary service. So no. Okay. So first of all, FTE count. Let's talk about what that is. That's your full-time equivalent. Well, your equivalent employees. So it's not. It is actual employees. Contractors are not employees. Okay. So it depends on if you're paying them W-2, that means they're an employee. If you're paying them a 1099, they're not an employee. You count W-2, you don't count 1099. So what do you issue them at the end of the day? If you do neither, if you're paying in this, if you're using a temp service, it's neither. They are either a contractor or an employee of the temp service, not you. So, so that is something, if you're paying a temp, you're usually just paying that as an expense. It's not, you're not issuing a W-2, then it wouldn't count. But if you have a loan for $50,000 and under, you don't have to worry about FTE count. You don't have to keep up your FTEs. I have a whole bunch of trainings about the FTE thing. I don't want to get into all the little ins and outs of the FTE count here because it can get really complicated. But in general, you add up all your employees at one point in time, you add up all your employees at another point in time, and you compare them. And your part-time employees count basically as a partial employee, right? So if they're 20 hours a week, they're half an employee. But I'm not going to get into all that specifics. If you haven't, download my PPP forgiveness tracker. That's where you can actually do all those calculations, and it will do it all for you. So that's jamietrull.com/PPP tracker. If you don't have it, we've had thousands of people that have downloaded our PPP tracker, and it has been helpful for them. So that could be really helpful in figuring out if you meet your FTE qualifications. Okay. Let's see. Kristen says, what bank do you like? Our big bank is Wells Fargo and did PPP through a small bank. Don't want to put main business accounts in a small bank. I do want to, I don't know why. I mean, I'll say this. I think small banks, a lot of times, like talk to people in your community. That's what I will say. The very first thing is to talk to people in your community, because especially if you want a local bank, right? If you want an actual branch there and somebody that you can talk to other business owners in your community about who they use. Because I know here, for example, like Franklin Synergy in my town is a huge one that a lot of people use because they're really friendly. You're going to get less fees for and a good experience, right? Versus a big bank. So I would challenge that a little bit to say I think small banks sometimes are actually a lot better for business banking, but just think about what your needs are, right? Because you want to make sure it also meets your needs. If you need ATMs all over the country, then you're not going to necessarily get that, but oftentimes they will partner with other ATMs. I personally use Aslo. I only recommend Aslo if you don't really deal in cash though, and don't need an actual ATM. So for me, I do Aslo. It's totally free business banking, AZLO is what it's called. And it's free, no minimums, no hidden fees, all the things. Like it's super easy. So I recommend Aslo, but that doesn't really work if you are wanting to be able to have cash branches where you can actually go deposit cash. So, but I would start by asking people in your specific community. Thank you, April. Let's see. So any of the questions about would I be able to apply, it's likely the same. If you were able to apply the last round, then you would be able to likely apply this round. So whatever you did in 2020, I would not imagine would have a significant impact on whether you would be able to apply or not, because that seems silly because 2020 is the reason that we have all these PPP loans. So I would imagine in most cases, it's going to still be based on 2019. And if you were able to apply for the first one, then you would be able to apply for the second one. Yes, there is talks of that on the eviction foreclosure moratorium, that could also get extended. I think that's something that's really critical, honestly, because there could be a impending cliff there, right? If people start having to be foreclosed on. So that is something that more than likely will be in the next bill, but it likely won't extend it all that far. So that's kind of the problem, is that we're kicking the can and we're kicking the can and we're kicking the can. But at some point, unless things get a lot better, we're going to kind of see a cliff. And that's the fear that I have with all of this. Okay, guys. Like I just talked a lot. You guys, there were tons of y'all on here today. That's great. So I'm going to try to keep doing more of these. I will jump on and do a quick update. It probably won't be next Friday is Christmas. So I will not be here next Friday. But if something does pass, I may jump on and just do a quick update on what I know here. Or at least post what I know into the Facebook group. So if you are not in our Facebook group, come join it. Financial Literacy for Women Business Owners. Even if you're not a woman, we are an inclusive group. So come on over. You can also go to jamietrull.com/group to get there. So I will definitely make sure that I update. If I don't do a live, I'll at least give you guys some updates with my thoughts on what's in the final bill. And then when we get back after next week, wherever we're at, I'll make sure I do kind of a deep dive into some of the details for this for you guys, because I want to make sure everybody knows what's going on and can get a hold of the help that they need. Because I know so many of you guys are still in this place where you're like, I don't know how much longer I can hang on with this, right? Like we're making it through, but like we are going to need some help. I do think help is coming. Will it be sufficient? I mean, probably not, but it'll be something. So I will continue to make sure that you know what's happening so you can get a hold of that and you don't miss anything that could have helped. That's my kind of goal and promise to you guys. Oh, good. I'm glad. I want to give you guys hope. That's something that is one of the things that is really, really important to me, is that I know it can get really easy to kind of get down in the dumps and frustrated. But we have to continue to keep hope. We have to continue to, to push through this. It will make you stronger. It will make you stronger. It will build resilience. These hard times always do. But I'm here to help. So that's what I'm here for, you guys. So you're welcome. I'm glad to be able to do it. And you guys are all awesome. And so I will see you soon, and I will be keeping up with all the changes so that you know exactly what's going on. So if I don't see you guys, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all the things to everybody. I hope that even though this is going to be a weird year, that there is some comfort and some rest that you guys can find this week amidst the chaos. So I'll talk to you guys later.